These games are just okay. One of the most immediate things I noticed was the plot of the game, and no I didn't. I don't care. The change in Wario's physics as compared to the first two games didn't feel like an evolution of either form of movement. It feels like entirely new. Like, fucking worse in the context of a platformer. Wario's overall heavier and doesn't have a good sense of momentum anymore, and it's even worse than in the first game. He's slower, and the flow of movement feels a lot clunkier and jagged in a way. Perpetual motion doesn't exist in his base walking state. The camera also functions differently and is equally as jagged and clunky. There's a distinct lack of fluid or smooth motion with the way the camera operates, and it was super jarring on startup. I mean, I got used to it, but it was weird playing it for the first time. Wario got a nice resprite, but he's a lot bigger than before and takes up a decent chunk of the screen. His position on screen relative to the camera is entirely centered too, and while you'd think that would be ideal, it gets in the way more often than not. Compare this to Wario Land 1, where Wario is consistently set a little bit behind the center of the camera. This is done deliberately so that the player can see ahead of them as much as they need to. And the only time Wario approaches the middle of the screen are in the confined and claustrophobic areas where it really isn't imperative to see too far in front of you, or if you're going slow. It reminds me of Sonic Advance 2. It reminds me of semen.
The consistency is just like semen.
In Virtual Boy Wario Land, Wario is equally as consistent to the center of the screen, but that game's horizontal nature and wider resolution gave it reason for the camera to operate the way it does. Wario Land 2 starts out in a squished space, the camera's always focused on you, giving you extreme tunnel vision, and Wario's way bigger than before. So at this point I'm thinking, ah shit, these are like cardinal platformer sins. Alright, so what is this game? And, well, basically, Takahiko Hosokawa decided it would be a good idea to expand on the puzzle elements introduced in the last game to make this game a puzzle platformer. You know, real big emphasis on the puzzle. It's not even really that bad of an idea, to be honest. It even makes some sense. Previous to this, Hosokawa worked as a designer on Metroid 2. With Virtual Boy Wario Land introducing puzzle-like and exploration-based mechanics to the series, it probably made a lot of sense internally to take Wario Land in a more Metroid-Mario crossbreed direction. With proper execution, a more slower-paced puzzle and exploration-based Wario Land could really work. There's tons of ways you could do it. Wario Land 2's idea is to give the game a branching level structure, and okay, yeah, I guess that could work. If you like make all the levels enjoyable and like give enough motivation to the player to do all that, then yeah, why not? You know, like Kirby did it, so why not? Go ahead! Before we talk about all that though, let's talk a bit about this game's presentation. The evolution of the Game Boy Color leaves room for the artists to really express themselves, as the progression of the sprite work is the first step to Wario Land's definitive style, which peaks in Wario Land 4, specifically with his design. Every game in the series made by R&D 1 from here on out improve on the visuals in a really natural and sensible way. Wario Land 3 specifically is an artistic feat. It looks great, especially for being on such a limited handheld. They finally understood what they wanted out of Wario's character by now too. He's as goofy and expressive as ever, and at this point he's cemented more as a misunderstood villain, incapable of anything malicious or truly evil. He's just greedy and comical, always finding himself in precarious positions. He probably invested a lot into XRP or something, or maybe he'd make his own pump and dump crypto scheme. Call it like Garlic Coin. Oh shit. Maybe Wario has some NFTs up for sale. Wario's characterization evolves even further in this direction in 4, so I sort of have to give credit to Wario Land 2 and 3 for planting the seed for 4's presentation to really thrive. To be honest with you, Wario Land 4 improves on everything introduced in 2 and 3, so it's a little bit hard not to bring up these 3 games together. I'm gonna try my hardest not to jump the gun though, so bear with me. Hey, speaking of Wario's characterization, is Wario German? Like, Mario and Luigi are Italian New Yorkers, but what's Wario supposed to be? Is he Italian too, or is he like German? He sounds German in the N64 games, but he isn't very caricaturistic like the Mario Bros. He isn't talking about sausages or calling me a Doomkopf, but still, it just feels really offensive somehow. Are Germans villainistic? Is that a stereotype? Oh, wait. Well, is he Italian then? He doesn't seem Italian, despite that apparently being his canonical nationality. I don't know where this notion came from, but when I was younger, I thought Wario was Mario and Luigi's cousin, so I figured he was Italian too. But his aggressive nature and speech patterns in the spin-offs make me think of him more as a Central European. He says "so ein Mist" in Mario Party, which is a German frustration phrase like "aw, darn it" or "damn it."
So ein Mist.
But it just sounds like he's saying "do, I missed," so that isn't any lead. Maybe he's one of those German Jews. No, Not because he's like greedy or anything, I'm just like, this game definitely brought up a lot of good ideas to the table. It's the first game in the series to expand on Wario's moveset to its fullest, adding things like his ball state and the ability to ground pound without a power-up. It even has the super jump. This game also introduced transformations, a staple of the series beyond this point. Which some kind of freak had to come up with. So, which one of you was it? I think they're canonically called conditions or reactions or some shit, but that's stupid, so I'm gonna call them transformations. I did some research and I went through a bunch of 4chan threads and yeah, people credit Wario for their interest in this. I mean, I'm not trying to judge, but who the hell was playing Wario Land 2 on their Game Boy Color and got hard when Wario turned flat? It made me soft. It's like the worst transformation in the game, too. They definitely didn't do this on purpose. You know, unless they did. I don't know. What are old Japanese game artists even into? Does that shit even reflect on their work at all? You think Kiyotake was like Osamu Tezuka and had a secret fetish art stash lying around? I mean, Wario's already a self-insert, so maybe this is indicative of that. Hey, wait, he totally is into transformation. He turned Metroid into a girl! What the fuck, man? Hey, anyway, do all these great ideas really matter if they aren't implemented well? I mean, I don't mean in the context of just this game, I mean every game. It's kind of a complicated question to answer, and there's lots of subjective aspects to take into account. And the question is a little unfair in reality. It calls into attention an even greater question in relation. How do you think aspects of video game discussion should be tackled? I know we were just talking about objectification and status change fetishes like just a minute ago, but hear me out here. When I was talking about Wario Land 1 and Virtual Boy Wario Land, I praised both of their presentation and gameplay factors. Every point of critique was shot towards what they decided not to do, whether it be aspect of Wario Land 1's presentation or lack of expansion of the physics in Virtual Boy Wario Land. I'm about to talk about the complete opposite, critique shot towards what they did decide to do. I really want this to be an open discussion portion, so I really don't want to make it seem like I'm telling you how to feel here. I want to make this distinction specifically because I feel like a lot of reviewers go on track to talk about something like this, but boil it down to some sort of proposed essential that they just take as the be-all end-all. This school of thinking isn't wrong, but I feel like it definitely suppresses discussion in a way. To me, you can boil down game discussion into two aspects, presentation and gameplay. They include things you'd expect from their definition, but also carry two very other important characteristics to them. Ambition and vision, included in both presentation and gameplay. If you give a shit about video games at all, I shouldn't have to explain how these two aspects affect each other directly. If you were to ask me the question, which is more important to you, presentation or gameplay, not too long ago I would have replied with something like, if your game looks nice but plays like shit, I won't want to play it, I just want to think about it or look at it. Or, if your game plays nice but looks like shit, you're missing a core aspect that makes me want to keep playing. While both of these statements have validity and are true in ways, I think they implicate that merit to playing your game is locked behind the balancing act of these two aspects, which isn't very fair. Game discussion is often locked to a set, talking about games as the sum of their parts. However, I've lately been distancing myself from this notion more and more, and started to see games more as their individual pieces brought together to make what they are, the pieces to its sum. Games are an art form and should be treated as such, so I'm hard-pressed to put priority in one of the two aspects over another. This stuff has to be treated equally when critically analyzing a game. Obviously, in a casual conversation, I can easily reprimand a game for playing or looking like shit. It doesn't matter. I can say I hate Celeste all I want, but in a format like this, that rhetoric has no validity. I definitely want to make a video on this topic in the future that goes deeper into what I mean, but that's gonna have to be after I make a video on Nichijou, and Yursei Yatsura, and No More Heroes, and Scott Pilgrim, and the Storybook games, and Shenmue and Jet Set Radio, so it's gonna be a while. I only bring this up in relation to Wario Land 2 and 3 because I didn't really like these games, and like I mentioned before, I have to critique what they are doing inversely to what they aren't. If I just talked about how shit these games felt to play and didn't mention any of the ambition or vision behind the project, I'd be implicating that they aren't worth your time. Which isn't true, by the way. You should definitely check these games out if they're of any interest to you. Respect is due when it comes to this shit. I couldn't have come up with Wario, are you kidding me? All games are worth the experience if they offer some new thinking within you. There's nothing wrong with judging something as a consumer, but just because a game plays badly or has bad execution of a good idea doesn't mean the game as a whole is bad, and the same goes for artistic faults. There's so many other aspects of games to talk and think about, and that's what makes the medium so interesting to study. I think Wario Land 2 and 3 act as good catalysts for this discussion, but again, that's only because I didn't like them. Usually shit like this comes up when you're talking about Sonic. Like I mentioned before, this game introduced the transformation mechanic to the series. Props to this game because this idea is really great. Since this game doesn't have a live system and getting hit only costs a few coins, particular enemies will transform Wario into a different state when hit. As good of an idea as this is, I really wish there was some extra conveyance to what enemies transformed you and which did nothing. This is a problem even in Wario Land 4. I really wish they had some kind of purple aura around them or a special outline that indicated they transform you. There were a lot of times where I was caught off guard at an enemy transforming me, and I guess that's the point, but it feels really arbitrary. It just sort of exists as a beginner's trap right now and puts gameplay flow at a halt. I wouldn't have to learn what enemies transform me and which don't if there was just a graphic assigned to them. And yeah, it doesn't matter now since I know which ones do since I've played it, but it's a little odd. It makes the player confused towards enemies, if anything. Instead of getting excited when I see an enemy thinking it might transform me, I just get hesitant because it could easily just take coins off me. Like, ooh, that one's gonna transform me, I wonder what the transformation is, not, will that one transform me?
Was that beer?
Something that also soured me on the way this game handled transformations was its introduction. The first enemy that transforms you turns you into this pancake Wario, and in this state your jump height is decreased, but your fall has a very specific arc to it. There's a bunch of coins you can only get to using this transformation, and considering this is the third level in the game, you think they wouldn't make the jump so difficult. It's supposed to be like an easy introduction to how the transformations work, right? Well, Jesus Christ, it took me 30 tries to get right! It isn't necessary to complete the level at all, but there's a similar part in Wario Land 3 that is required to beat the level, and it's fucking worse! I can't tell if it's because of the way the transformation controls, the stage structure, or both, but these sections fucking sucked. Flat Wario comes back in Wario Land 4, but he's seldom used for any difficult progression challenges. I don't know why they made the transformations work this way. They all hinder Wario's progression instead of helping him. It's really bizarre. I get that's like the quirk of them, but the transformations in Wario Land 4 also drastically change or hinder Wario's movement, but the levels are designed in tandem with those changes. In 2 and 3, you move like shit and the level doesn't compensate for it at all. It's weird too, because almost all the transformations work this way. The only two I would say don't are Puffy Wario and Fire Wario. Puffy Wario makes you perpetually float upwards, allowing you to get into higher portions of the level. And Fire Wario is mostly used for gated progression puzzles, since you can only break the fire blocks needed to move further in the level when you're in this state. Even if these two transformations aren't as bad as the rest, which I'll get into in a second, they're definitely still underutilized. Puffy and Fire Wario are expanded on in unique ways come Wario Land 4, so it's not like it's their concepts that make them bad. It really is just how they're executed. I really like that Fire Wario becomes more of a reaction-based challenge in 4, forcing you to rush to the blocks you need to destroy while precisely platforming with a hindered moveset. There isn't much of this in 2 and 3 at all. Here's a quick rundown of what I mean when I say the transformations hinder Wario. Fat Wario makes you really slow and heavy, but you can break denser blocks with your jump, which they only use for more gated progression puzzles. Bouncy Wario can only bounce upward, and the only time it's used for anything other than a bonus is to set you back and waste your time. There's also Drunk Wario. He has a tumbling momentum to his walk, and he'll also change your direction at will. This could be used for a multitude of interesting platforming challenges, but instead the enemies that turn you drunk are often there for you to avoid. You know, there's no bonuses to getting drunk at all, so why even bother drinking? Nothing good comes from drinking alcohol.
Put it in your stomach!
Maybe the way this transformation was implemented was intentional. I'm trying to teach kids that alcohol dependency is a bad thing. Kids won't drink if it makes them act like Wario. It's really odd to me that they were so insistent on this kind of design. It's prevalent all the way to the final level. Like, here, you're supposed to platform your way to the next room, but these penguins that make Wario drunk are in your way. Your punishment for falling down is getting transformed, and you have to embarrassingly walk towards the water to untransform and restart the process all over again. It's pretty useless level design, especially for the final level. It would have been way cooler if you were forced to transform, and the platforms in front of you were tailored to your new movement. That way, a unique challenge that couldn't be offered to the player before can be offered to them here. Maybe you could structure it vertically, have the pool of water that cleanses Wario at the top, and start the camera there and pan it down to Wario's actual position at the bottom. The player could recognize what they need to do with their new uncomfortable moveset to get to the top, and it would make the platforming satisfying. There actually is level design like this in this game in the form of the ball sections, which were actually pretty nice. The platforming in those sections are extremely reactionary and require a lot of quick input reflexes, which I love a lot in action platformers. There aren't too many ball sections in Wario Land 2, but 3 makes up for it by putting more in. As most of the transformation sections are now, they just sort of exist to slow you down and set you back. I should be excited to transform, not dread its necessity. I was watching reviews of this game on YouTube, and a lot of them said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, I really like the way the transformations hinder Wario in this game and set him back," and they fucking meant it. Now what the fuck? Are you that pressed to say something positive about this game that you just have to spin the things that suck about it? That shit's like if I captured a bullet bill in Mario Odyssey and it just auto-flew me to the beginning of the level and I went, "Aw, yes!"
And it almost makes this game play more like a Kirby game than a Mario game.
This shit isn't like Kirby at all! I transform in Kirby and kick ass while I breeze through the level with cool new tricks and attacks. I touch an enemy in this game and become super fat. My fucking speed value is set to like -1. Gotta wait like 30 years for the game to become fun again! The levels in Wario Land 2 also take a different direction, barring the levels with a focus on transformations. I guess this is where you'd say the puzzle elements of this game really shine, but it's less puzzle-orientated and more exploration-based. When starting a level, the game will always tell you a goal in mind. It's basically a clear condition. In the beginning of the game, you're meant to find Wario's faucet and alarm clock and turn both off. This first bit of the game takes place in Wario's mansion, and in hindsight, I really like the level's look and feel. The walls have a bunch of pictures of Wario, and some sections even have his face carved in with stone. I really love how these look. You can definitely tell it's based off of whatever 3D model they had of him at the time. It's super charming. There's a multitude of walls in this level you can break open with your shoulder bash to collect the treasures inside, and I really love the implication of Wario's character here. He hides all his gold inside of walls so that no one else can get to it but him. I love that. It's a pretty small detail, but one that implies a lot about his character in a really fun way. This level's really the only one reminiscent of the game's predecessors, since there's a lot of pretty solid platforming here too. There's a part where you need to time your jumps off these drifting pieces of furniture in the water to make it across, but falling in the water could lead to a discovery of a secret area. This first level does a pretty great job of introducing what the gameplay flow is supposedly going to be like. Solid platforming, exploration beyond the progression's path, and clear conditions that ask you to explore your surroundings to find the item of interest. Yeah? Well, forget it, because it's a lie. While the structure of the levels do end up differing, with there being more vertical scaling levels, it quickly devolves into just finding the exit or beating the boss.
My voice cracks a lot.
I was really hoping the rest of the game would have a similar level structure with its goal conditions, but in my playthrough I didn't see too many. There was this one where I had to return this hen back to her nest, but other than that they were all mundane. My guess would be that traveling down different level paths would give you more varied level goals, which I definitely would have liked to see more of. But do you think I feel the need to care enough to replay through the game to see these different conditions?
How the fuck you think I feel?
Yeah, so this game has differing level paths. Like I mentioned before, it sort of works like Kirby, specifically Amazing Mirror. Think this, but each square is a full level you play, and finding treasures works like Great Cave Offensive. The only issue with this is that as a result of the game's already lackluster level design, I really don't feel any motivation to seek out alternative exits to see any of the other levels, even if they are better. If the bulk of your game is already not fun to play, I'm not going to feel inclined to play through the rest of it just to see if it gets any better. This problem is accentuated further since the game's most obvious level path makes the experience streamlined enough to where it doesn't overstay its welcome. I don't want to play this shit any longer than I already have to, I'm fatigued! The branching level structure isn't a bad idea at all, but when the gameplay presented here already isn't that great, I don't feel the need to squeeze the game dry of all it has. I don't want to sit through more shitty transformations and clunky bosses more than I already have to. You know, it's just not in my busy schedule, okay? Hey, speaking of bosses, let's talk about that. Since you can't die by getting hurt in this game, getting hit by a boss will more often than not send you directly upward. After getting blasted up, you land on these platforms above the arena, where you have to walk out of the door and redo platforming to get back to the boss. This is infuriating! I can't learn shit about the boss when if I make one mistake, I have to do a fucking gay walk of shame back to the arena and start the boss all over again. It's so strange, especially considering the previous two games' really solid boss design and some of the great ones here. Virtual Boy Wario Land's bosses were less than ideal, but they at least didn't push the reset button on my system for brushing pixels with them, god damn! There's this cool bunny boss who's constantly trying to throw you into this basketball hoop to gain points against you, and it reminded me of the bull boss in the first game. You get so fed up with the boss, you end up wanting to give him a taste of his own medicine, which ends up being what works. He's the only boss that allowed me to make a mistake, and I learned from it, making the boss more enjoyable. They do this shit all the way up to the end of the game. The final boss I ended up fighting operated the same way. This was specifically enraging because that boss sucks my cock! Captain Syrup sits at the top of the screen in this knockoff Eggmobile, rocking from left to right. Below you is a bed of lava, shooting spires up in succession to burn your ass and send you up to restart. Meanwhile, Syrup is chucking enemies at you that if you fail to catch can get burned by the fire, making them impossible to pick up. If you get hit by the burned enemy, you're more than likely to get knocked back into a spire, sending you straight up to reset again. You're supposed to throw the enemies back at Syrup for damage, but with all these variables and things to keep track of, it's unsatisfying and frustrating to pull off. Yeah, Yeah, it makes the boss tense, but it doesn't even end there. She'll eventually close off her weakness and start throwing bombs at you that send shockwaves of fire that also shoot you up in combination with the lava spires. I figured you were supposed to throw the bombs above her and onto her head, you know, her only exposed spot, but no, of course not. You're supposed to throw the bombs at the lava spires, timed perfectly with Syrup's position to even have a chance of doing damage to her in this phase. This is conveyed horribly, and it took more time for me to figure out how to even do damage to her than it did beating Demon Head in the last game. Her hitbox is completely fucked, too, so sometimes the lava would clearly touch her, but it wouldn't do shit for damage. Of course, though, if you even graze the lava or a bomb blast, you're sent directly up and have to do this fucking walk back to the arena, where her health is reset! It's a completely patient yet fucked boss fight. I get that it's supposed to be hard, but this is just stupid. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to just chuck the bombs back at her for damage. It would have been the perfect difficulty if that were the case. The spires are already hard to dodge as is. Why are you making me juggle 18 different things just to beat a boss? Again, there might be more cool bosses on the different paths, but there's no way in hell I'm playing more shitty levels just for the chance of more cool bosses. They might just all be as bad as the final boss. Fuck if I know. And fuck if I care. Maybe it isn't right for me to critique areas of the game I haven't played, and maybe it makes my opinion invalid, but in this specific situation, I don't care! If what's being presented to me is the standard the game operates at, and then I'm offered more of that shitty standard, fuck that! I'm turning the game off.
Turning the game off.
Just like the games that came before it, this game has a treasure system. There's collectibles attached to each level, and with the whole branching level structure, there's a ton of MacGuffins to grab for completion. Unlike its predecessors, however, you aren't graded at the end for how much treasure you collected. The different endings are separated through whichever path you end up taking, and if you ended up going for 100% completion.
What the fuck?
What?
Huh?
There's different endings.
No!
Fundamentally, a system like this could function pretty well, but the way it works in tandem with the damage system seems completely counterintuitive. When you get hit in this game, you lose coins, but like I said before, you aren't graded at the end of the game for how many you have, like in the previous entries. Coins in this game are exclusively used on tries for minigames that give you completion collectibles. If they were used in the same way as the previous games in tandem with this new system, it might have added a little more at stake for the boss fights. As they are now, there's no reason to lose coins when you get hit in this game. Because you can't die and there's no score-based ending, there would be no point in the bosses making you lose coins. All it really does is push you further back from completion, if anything. So they opt for this redo system for the bosses, which makes sense on paper, but if you ask me, allowing the bosses to hit you normally and force you to lose coins would add a lot of tension to messing up. As it is now, coins have no value to me because they only serve as a means for achieving 100% completion, something I don't care about anyway, since it's presented as unsatisfying in the first place. If they implemented a treasure-based ending mechanic to this game, it would push me to explore for more coins so I can have an excess to spend on both minigames for collectibles and gambling, while also having enough for a good ending. Encouraging the player to explore like this would also possibly result in them stumbling on an alternate exit, which could be a really cool first-time discovery. It would add a sufficient amount of depth lacking in the earlier game's treasure-based ending mechanics, even if this new structure I'm imposing is strict. Wario Land 2 has an overabundance of coins to begin with, so more things that add to their value seem like a natural extension of their use case. This coin shit and getting hit having no punishment affects a lot of facets of the game I don't think the designers were anticipating, like the bosses or player motivation, and it's a bit of a shame. Wario Land 2 could have been a great evolution of ideas introduced in the first two games, but instead decides to reinvent to a fault. This game is odd in the fact that it feels like it's pretending to be puzzle-orientated, but most of the puzzles are just there to gate your progression, not test your skill or problem-solving in any meaningful way. Usually, puzzles in games exist to block you off from going forward, of course, but the gratification of completing said puzzle shouldn't be, "Aw, finally I can go forward." It should be, "Aw, what a great fucking puzzle!" I should feel like Einstein after completing a puzzle in a game.
My God, it's Albert Einstein! It's Albert Einstein! Oh my God, it's Albert Einstein!
In Wario Land 2, it's either that you can't go forward here because you aren't transformed, or being transformed will make this platforming more difficult, so it's something you want to avoid. I don't know if I'd really call those puzzles. They're more like paying fucking troll tolls. It's not fun. I don't scratch my brain at what I'm supposed to do. All the answer to the puzzles are completely one note. In this way, the game is really tugging back and forth on whether or not it wants to be a puzzle platformer or an action platformer. It isn't mixing concepts of both genres in any interesting ways like Virtual Boy Wario Land did, but it doesn't want to commit to prioritizing one or the other either. The game doesn't put enough thought into its puzzles, and because it's also juggling being an action game, its platforming sections feel substandard. I really don't want to convey that this game isn't worth your time, because maybe it would totally be up your alley. Maybe you'd love the exploration aspect of finding the different level paths, the way the transformations function, the strict bosses, or be more interested to see more of the game. But as it stands, the way all those ideas are executed just don't do it for me, especially taking into consideration what they did beforehand in the previous games. I can't say they're bad ideas just because they were executed poorly, and I can really respect this game's vision for the future of Wario games, but it's just too rough around the edges for me to enjoy. Presentation-wise, it's subpar too, minus the character sprites. The music is forgettable, the set pieces are uninteresting, and the rare instances where I enjoy the locales I'm in are just that, rare. That bit about the music isn't to knock the composer or anything. Her name's Kazuo Ishikawa, and she's done a good bit of great work for Nintendo. She composed the music for Link's Awakening, which that game's whole deal is about making music, so. She also did work on the sound effects for Earthbound, which means there's a good chance she concocted one of these sounds. There really was some great talent working on this game, but the gameplay is just too much of a grab bag of great ideas done poorly or good ideas executed infrequently well. But I would still call this a good game. You can tell they really tried and wanted to make something separate from the previous experience while setting up a potential sequel for more than just a Mario spinoff. It has this really specific aura to me, like they knew that it didn't matter if things didn't end up too well because they always had the chance to improve on the ideas they played with. And you know, I can kinda respect it for that. So, is Wario Land 2 bad, taking into consideration my soapbox speech about game attributes? No, I don't think so. Is there less positive reaction to chew on than the previous titles in terms of immediate feedback like gameplay? I mean, that's really where Wario Land 2 and even 3 falter. They're stepping stones that offer just enough individuality to set them apart from the other games that surround them, but that individuality is what make up their faults. That doesn't mean they should be discredited and that doesn't mean they should be discredited in discussion either. Oh my god. To be honest with you, I really don't want to talk about this game at all. I didn't hit record the last time I played Wario Land 3, so I apologize if I end up reusing footage or taking footage from other sources or just don't have enough footage to properly convey what I'm talking about here. Thankfully, there isn't too much to talk about in terms of Wario Land 3, despite the changes they made in both the gameplay and presentation departments, so this bit of the video might be a bit short anyway. I also didn't beat the game either. Wario Land 3 ended up being close to my least favorite in the entire series, which really baffled me considering how often I see people citing it as their favorite. The game had a development cycle of about 2 years and has the same staff crossover barring a few new faces on the programming team. They definitely had a lot of time and room to learn from the previous game and expand on what was introduced in it in a way that's innovative, and, you know, in that way I think they definitely succeeded. They take the branching level structure from 2 and smooth it out to function like a world map, but there's still reason to replay through each level. Every stage has 4 colored chests that have goodies for Wario to find, and that makes the levels especially designed around exploration in this one. Each chest is in a different location in every level that requires different abilities to even reach sometimes. Yeah, you get fucking abilities in this game. You start out exclusively with the jump and shoulder bash, but Wario can't ground pound, super jump, or even swim or grab enemies in the beginning of the game. You have to find and unlock the rest of your moveset through finding the chests that hold them, allowing you to progress further in other areas of the game that you couldn't before.
I can ground pound now.
They really went hard on the Metroid Mario crossbreed idea, since this game is essentially a platformer Metroidvania. The only difference is that instead of the levels being interconnected through one big world, they're delegated to being their own playgrounds you can select on a world map. It's literally Mario meets Metroid. As much as I'm not a fan of this idea, I think there's some aspects of it that have solid execution, especially since the game lets you know which levels you can progress in. They do this with these little arrow graphics on the level icon, and it's really helpful. Speaking of the graphics, the assets in this game are kind of fucking awesome. I especially like this pause screen. The save icon has this super stylistic feel to its lettering, and the gradient in the background is really pleasing to the eye. Everything on this screen is structured really well too. You have all the basic functions of a pause screen up here, and it leaves room on the bottom of the screen to show all your stats for the level you're in. It's shit you don't really think about now, but if they structured the screen in any other way, it would have been compromising in terms of where these stats could have gone. It would have been all the more annoying to click on an icon to send myself to another screen just to track my progress. The golf minigame screen is equally as nice to look at, and I'm a real sucker for gradient dithering like that, especially with these colors. Is golf, like, an integral part of Wario's character? Did he go out golfing with Mario in, like, NES Open? Cause this game sure does love to make me golf with Wario! Look at this! Look at this! Oh my god, look at this! They do a similar coloring technique on the assets in Wario Land 4, specifically with the time-up graphic, but it's particularly of note here because it's on the Game Boy Color. You don't really see a lot of effects like that on the original Game Boy, so the expanded color palette really did a lot for the artistic conveyance of games, like I said before. There are some fucking great looking games on the Game Boy Color, by the way. Donkey Kong Country, Mario Golf, Mega Man Extreme, and Snoopy Tennis come to mind. It's pretty cool to note how great all these games can look, even on such limited hardware. Wario Land 3 is a pretty significant improvement from 2 in this department, too. The tile sets are of note, they're a really stark upgrade. I mean, look at the fucking pause screen between Wario Land 2 and 3. Granted, this screen doesn't need anything fancy to it since there's no need for progression stats, but what the fuck kind of asset is this?
You look ridiculous.
I see a lot of people call this game and other Metroidvanias like it non-linear, and it's like, I guess you could say that. People call games like Super Metroid or Link to the Past non-linear, and I guess by definition, the ability to choose the order of progression in games is a non-linear experience, but I still end up doing the same shit, it's just in a different order. I'm still required to beat all the levels, it's not like I can skip any. When I think of something non-linear, I think of like Breath of the Wild or Mario 64. I can do all this shit in those games in any order, or just skip it entirely if I want. I'm hard-pressed to say a platformer like Wario Land is non-linear at all. Bowser's Castle in Mario World is more non-linear than this shit. You don't gotta go through all the doors in that level, you can just skip some. I fucking wish I could skip levels in this game. Wario Land 3 has a day-night cycle, meaning the level layouts will change depending on whether or not it's daytime or nighttime in the game, which allows players to discover different paths not previously available depending on the time of day. The time cycles through every time you beat a level. If it's day, it'll turn to night and vice versa. I initially thought it was just an aesthetic thing, something to give the maps more flavor. It might have been a cool addition if that were the case, since it would address the issues I had with Wario Land 1's world map, but it's a game mechanic in this game, an absolute necessity. There's almost no way to know which levels are going to have different paths during the cycle shift unless the game literally spells it out for me, like in this level with these sun and moon symbols. It's like fake depth, which, is a problem most Metroidvanias have anyway. As it works now, the day-night cycle only exists to pad out the game and block your progression flow from being streamlined and free, to make the length of the game artificially longer. It might have just been a better decision to have all the paths open all at once and allow the player to choose which to go through at their own will, instead of arbitrarily mandating when and where the player can go to specific areas. But maybe this is more of a problem with the way levels are strung together in the form of a world map, rather than the day-night cycle itself. This issue is accentuated with the way they tell the player which level has a path open, too. I appreciate the arrows assigned to the levels telling me where to go, but because you do tell me where to go, I feel completely disengaged from the proposed depth of progression you have going on. If you didn't tell me where to go, the game would be padded out to be way longer because I'd get lost more, but since you do tell me where to go, there's no engagement. Wario Land 3 takes place in this dimension inside of a music box, and you'd think that they use that as an excuse to have some fantastical levels, but it's just boring villages and caves again. I was actually really interested to see what kind of setting the game would take place in at the start, since the first thing that greets you is this giant, big-lipped face, but unfortunately it's pretty stock standard. And they kind of followed the same idea they did for the setting in Virtual Boy Wario Land, as we're taking the character away from the world we already know to put him somewhere completely new. The difference is, in that game, the world is entirely underground, giving the game a motif to follow that's intriguing. In this game, we're just in some world that looks no different to Wario's own. The fact that it's in a music box is a footnote, if anything. I really wish there was more of a point to it being what it is. You collect these weird trinkets that can affect the world, but it's just surface level shit that opens paths for you to progress. Maybe you could have a couple levels where you explore the different compartments and mechanics of the music box instead of just the same cave 5 times over. What if the music box was broken and its inhabitants wanted to suck in a hero from the outside world to help fix it? Maybe they were hoping for someone like Mario, but instead get this mustard fuck. I don't know, anything to make me care about the plot and setting in a platformer aside from how it looks. Please, just make me interested. I know they were really hoping taking aspects of Mario and mixing them with Metroid would make the experience more interesting, but it just kind of bogs the game down. I mean, it's not like having an interconnected world-based Metroidvania was an impossibility on the Game Boy. The only reason I can think of for why the game has a world map is to make it more like Mario, which they clearly wanted to do. I feel like they maybe took the worst attributes to mix, too, because this kind of game can be done well. In fact, it was. If you want to play a cool platformer Metroidvania with an interconnected world and elements of action platformers that also looks nice, play Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. Or just play all the Shantae games. They're not all great, but you'll probably like them more than this game. To be honest, all this just makes me really glad they dropped this genre for this series after this game. The idea of compartmentalized playgrounds that you revisit after unlocking abilities that grant you to do more things isn't a bad one. They do that shit in fucking Mario 64, but I just don't think it works with this weird DNA mixture of a game. Hey, the transformations are still here. They still suck. Well, most of them anyway. The new transformation, Vampire Wario, I think is executed pretty nicely. As Vampire Wario, you can turn into a bat and fly around to cross to different paths that normal Wario couldn't, but touching water or light will turn you back to normal. Every Vampire Wario section I played laid out the challenge in front of you before you transformed, giving the player ample time to plan out how to tackle the obstacle. Like in this room, the lights are clearly displayed in front of you before you transform, or here with the water dripping. It's how every transformation ought to work, on top of giving the player an interesting platforming or maneuvering challenge to attempt with their new moveset. Since the moveset of Vampire Wario isn't too complex anyway, most of his sections come down to just dodging things that'll turn you back to normal, but it's not like the mechanic is requiring any kind of intense depth to be engaging. It works on its own, unlike the rest of the transformations, which are unchanged from 2. If anything, like I said before, the transformation sections in this game are worse due to the game's exacerbated level design issues on account of the increased scope. Any new ideas presented or lessons learned from Wario Land 2 and progression to 3 only exist to accentuate the issues that already existed. On paper, Wario Land 3 is supposed to take the direction introduced in 2 and polish it out to make it a better experience, but it just falls flat. The bosses function the same way with a few exceptions, despite these exceptions being too easy. The music is equally as grating, despite the positive changes in presentation. The punishment padding is worse than before due to the lack of changes in the transformation system, and all things unique to the game are extremely frustrating, mandatory aspects with easy alternative design opportunities that they just said fuck it with. Like this shitty golf minigame you have to play over and over to progress doesn't need to be here, and neither does the day-night cycle. Also, I didn't have fun playing it, so that means it's bad. I can definitely see the appeal of a game like this, especially with how it's structured to be a long-form experience, but I just can't shake the feeling they were still worried its action platforming elements were going to be downplayed because of the rest of their new ideas. It's like they're compensating the entire time. There's fits of genius in Wario Land 3 that mix action platforming with exploration gameplay really well. Like these ball sections where you have to choose a path to go down, taking you to different areas of the level, but it pushes hard on its Metroid DNA to the point where it's unenjoyable. Maybe if I come back to the game later, I'll feel a lot different about it. The game is definitely designed to make repeated playthroughs more leisurely due to the player's knowledge, but as is, I think I hate this game. Funny coming from someone who loves playing games that are supposed to be a rough first playthrough and didn't even beat this one, but look, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't have the patience, and I don't have to explain anything. I could have just not talked about Wario Land 3 and no one would have cared. I just want to talk about Wario Land 4. I don't know how to make being upset with the game entertaining, okay? Fuck! Hey, you ever play these games though? These aren't Wario Land games, but I figured I've at least mentioned every other Wario game at this point, so why not make this video a one-stop shop for all things Wario? Oh well, I guess I haven't mentioned Master of Disguise yet. Did you know Wario loves bombs? He can't get enough of them! I don't know where this characteristic came from, but the early Wario games always has him fucking around with explosives. Maybe it comes from him being German and evil, but for whatever reason, they thought Wario should be synonymous with bombs. Do you like Bomberman? I sure do. At least I think I do. I think I should. I had Bomberman Jetters as a kid on my GameCube, and I played the fuck out of that. It has this cool single-player campaign and a really expansive battle mode with a ton of stuff in it, and it also has these fucking guys. I'm sure if I played the game now, I'd find a lot to complain about it, especially in terms of the single-player stuff since it doesn't look too fun to play, but I have a lot of nostalgia for this game. It makes me want to play more Bomberman games. I know a lot of people like Bomberman 64, and every YTP MVer has a hard-on for Redial from Bomberman Hero, so I'd really love to check out the series one day. It'll give me a chance to gush about how much I love the composer of a majority of the games, Jun Chikuma. She did those badass Arabian tracks on Sonic and the Secret Rings on top of the drum and bass in Bomberman Hero. She's a super interesting composer I suggest checking out. I'm only bringing this up because Wario Blast is a crossover game between Wario and Bomberman. And by crossover game, I mean absolute reskin. I mean, it's still cool though. I really like the art direction here with these transition screens, and some of this music is pretty damn good for a Game Boy game. There's also Wario's Woods, which is like this weird puzzle game I can't get behind. Nintendo keeps fucking re-releasing this game through different means, and I always end up trying to play it, but I'm just so god-awful at it. And I'm the puzzle guy. I like Puyo Puyo. I played Pieces on SNES. Wario World is really the only game out of this bunch I can consider some kind of successor to Wario Land. It came out 2 years after Wario Land 4, and I'm guessing Nintendo asked Treasure to make their interpretation of what a 3D Wario Land would play like. I like the progression of the name Land to World that Nintendo does. It's a cute little trend they follow, even with such a weird game like this. I haven't played this game all the way through, but like I said, it was developed by Treasure. The director is a Koichi Kimura, who also directed Stretch Panic. Reading reviews of Wario World, and with my own previous knowledge of the games he's worked on, it seems like he consistently makes almost cool games in the eyes of the general consumer. Which, you know, means I'd probably love all his games. He was also the producer on Silhouette Mirage, which is a pretty neat game. The other director on this game is Hitoshi Yamagamagami, this Nintendo dude who does a lot of modern production work. Wario World was actually the last game he directed hands-on, falling into consistent production work after. Anyway, Wario World's cool. It's interesting to note that they actually brought in John Cena and the Hulk to mocap some of Wario's wrestling moves in the game, but other than that, I don't really know what to say about it since I haven't played it too much. And I did like flinging enemies around and listening to Wario scream at them. I actually didn't play any of these games in preparation for this video. I just kind of wanted to include this part as a nice little pace breaker before